Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Anshul Ramachandran, founding team at Windsurf, and Billy Mitchell, executive editor of AIScoop, to discuss how government can adopt AI and remain competitive.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Anshul, welcome to DC. You're from the Valley and
the other coast.
Yes, the other coast, the much nicer, more beautiful, and more exciting coast right now.
The weather's nice here.
Yeah.
I'll give the props.
Well, we're excited to talk about mission critical code and the future of federal AI development. Obviously, Windsurf is pushing in this direction right now. But to start, will you give us a bit of a primer on what Windsurf is, sort of the gap that it's looking to fill with some of the code generation, and why you think the federal market's a good one to look to penetrate with that sort of that development area that you're focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the really quick TLDR, I think Billy actually just did a great job about that. At Windsurf, we're building AI tools for software development, right? Really any kind of software, whether it's you're trying to take legacy systems and upgrade or modernize it, or you're trying to build net new application code, you're a data scientist, really anyone who writes code of any form. Our core thesis is how do we take that process and make it 99% more efficient, right? There's always going to have to be a human figuring out what does there need to be built next, but really how can we just simplify the process of building, right? So people can focus on the ideas and whatever the mission is. And so that's kind of what we did. And when it comes to the federal government specifically, right, I don't think it's too hard to connect the dots. There's a lot of people working building software, both in the federal government, in agencies, in the Department of Defense, in the intelligence communities, but then also in the more broader federal ecosystem, right, through contractors and the likes. And so there's just a lot of development being done. And some of this software that's being built is quite literally the most mission critical systems out there, right? They're there for national defense. They're there for research, right? And so when it really comes to our goal of accelerating all software development by 99%, it was kind of a necessity that, like, hey, we need to be also supporting all of these initiatives as well.
Yeah.
And we've always been a company that's prided us on working in regulated industries, even in the commercial side. And we've built a lot of systems around security and scale that actually translate pretty nicely. So when we kind of pieced all those things together, it seemed like the right time to really start helping the federal environment.
That's great. And I've been covering federal government, federal tech for almost 12 years, probably more in some instances. One thing that there's a lot of is legacy code. And so I imagine that's a reason that it's an attractive market. You talked about that push to 99, accelerating to 99%. How does that mix with sort of that legacy code? Is that something you think Windsurf can take a chunk out of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you ask, I think there was like a stat where I think about 70% of federal spending on software-related projects were around maintenance, around modernization. This wasn't building net new systems. It was just purely keeping around technology that had been built in the 60s, the 70s, that are still running, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge opportunity for anyone, because that isn't the thing that's moving the needle today in the 21st century, right? So that is a huge piece which we spend a lot of time trying to build the systems for. How can we obviously work at that scale, but then first off, how do we even make our tools available to people working on those projects, right? These are classified, highly regulated projects for a reason. And so we're pretty proud that we're the only AI code assistant that is FedRAMP High authorized and IL5 authorized. And so we want to make sure that we can meet those security standards, but then also deliver cutting edge AI that even the most tech forward commercial and private organizations use.
Yeah. I imagine, because you work with a lot of different regulated industries writ large, the federal government's a unique beast. It's got there's great things about it, and there's challenging aspects, to put it one way. And in watching the federal government over the last decade plus, there's been this always sort of like this pull to bring Silicon Valley closer to the Beltway, to sort of inject some of that in, some of that fail fast mentality. And then there's been ebbs and flows of how that's worked to certain degrees. And I'm curious, as you've worked, you mentioned FedRAMP. For those who might not be aware, that's sort of the federal government's risk management and authorization framework for cloud security technology. Tell me about that proposition and sort of how you managed to get through it. What was your experience like? And did you have a good experience as you've sort of entered the federal market? Because I often hear that the Silicon Valley, the innovators, are in a completely different world than we here in DC are.
I think that's a fair question. I will say one thing. I think it's easy for me to come here and be like, yes, everyone needs to move way quicker. Like that's like the easy answer. But I'm also a little bit of like a realist and pragmatist. And like, you know, a lot of the, you know, pieces of the FedRAMP authorization are there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? It is actually quite important for a system to be properly containerized for security purposes, right? It is important that a software organization adheres to certain security practices when developing new code. Like these are actually quite important things for the federal government to actually have trust in the vendor. So as easy as it is for me to say like, oh no, make all these things like super easy and cut this, like they're there for a reason, and I actually think they're like quite meaningful. Luckily for us, like we actually have built and architected our system in that way from the beginning, because even without considering the federal government directly in the beginning, like we do work with some of the largest banks,
Sure.
you know, in the country and the world. We work with some of the, you know, largest defense contractors, some of the largest telecom companies, healthcare companies. So already we wanted to make sure we had a strong security posture. So a lot of our architecture was kind of easy to transfer, just from purely getting the authorization. I think the place where I would say is like you kind of alluded to, which is like the, I wouldn't say fail fast, but I will maybe reword that into like try things quickly.
Yeah.
Right? I think that part, once you have systems that are, you know, ready to be deployed prime time, actually trying them and getting the hands dirty with them, and seeing exactly how much that can push, right? Like for us in the commercial side, we're improving developer productivity today from anywhere from like 40 to 60%. That's kind of where we're at today. Still a little ways from the 99%, but 40 to 60%. Even if we make every assumption of how complicated the federal government is, how old the systems are, how much existing code there is the reality that we're probably going to get some double-digit percentage increase in productivity? Absolutely. And if that happens, what does that mean? Then, you know, costs that are spent on modernization efforts get cut down by literal billions of dollars, right? Like the kinds of new systems and projects that we can take on with the same amount of funding that is being appropriated for certain projects. Like, then the realm of possibility comes. But none of that's going to happen until we start trying something.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's probably that part of the ethos. Like, don't cut away security standards, don't cut away compliance standards, those are important. But once that's in place, having that is I think, one of the things which I see a little bit of a difference in it. I think, like, you know, I'd love to be part of helping the government.
Yeah, be the evangelist. We need more. You mentioned backstage the ATO process is also an inhibitor. Tell me about your experience with that, especially as you look to work with agencies.
Look, we just want to work with everybody. At the end of the day, that's what we want. Like, it's like we help pretty much everyone who wants to write code.
Yeah.
There isn't like a specific type of language or stack or anything like that. So for us, we would love to just walk down the street and knock on everyone's door and be like, hey, we have a tool that we think can cut millions of dollars. But there is, you know, politics involved with everything, right? And so I think the ATO process is, you know, you have to go one by one, and you have to, you know, convince, on top of having the authorizations, that you have the authority to operate with a particular agency. There might be some like homegrown tool which people are like, oh, we have something, and aren't willing to try what could be next. And I don't think this is like particular to us by any means, right? I think this is just generally how I've kind of noticed things going. I think those are the things which absolutely can get accelerated. All the processes are there for a reason. And in a world which is moving this quickly, with the technology that's moving this quickly, it's probably just in everyone's best interest to just like rethink what does that actually mean in the age of AI.
Yeah. Speaking of the age of AI, I'm curious, you know, as you know, the title of this panel suggests mission critical, and what kind of code is mission critical? What kind of, you know, you've led engineering teams in the past, and so when you think about the federal AI landscape as things are moving more quickly, what really is that mission critical code, and how are you thinking about AI, using AI to be able to really modernize and reform that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I will say, like, when we say like mission critical code, we've had code in the federal government for decades. It's all been mission critical.
Yeah.
Right. So code as a concept, like software, especially in this world, which is moving more and more digital, that digital fabric is mission critical. Like, I'm not going to be the first one today at the conference, I'm going to be the last one to say just how important the entire digital ecosystem is when it comes to defense and research and all of these pieces. So that part, I think, has always been the case. But when we think about digital fabric, really what AI is really enabling is like three things, right? One is strengthening that, right? I would say that's kind of where all these modernization efforts and things go. Like, as these systems are starting to fall apart, as compute and tech and all the other libraries and systems are getting better, like strengthening that is one piece where AI can come into play. The other places, the nature of the fabric is changing, right? Like, while we provide AI tools, like absolutely the government and the federal government is building AI tools themselves to perform missions. Like, the kinds of natures of what actually lives in that digital fabric is changing. And the third one is just the rate at which we can expand that digital fabric, right? The rate at which we can build new things and tackle new problems. And I think I would say probably the first and the third are probably the places where a tool like Windsurf really comes in, really helping strengthen and expand and accelerate the expansion of that digital fabric. But yeah, that is critical. That is critical, national infrastructure for us to have, just given how the world has evolved and where the battles are being fought and where the competition is.
Curious how, as you were entering the sort of beltway space, trying to work with federal agencies, how important partnerships were for helping you navigate as you were gaining familiarity. I think you mentioned Palantir, you worked with Palantir through the FedRAMP process, but how important is it to have that guiding organization or somebody, or maybe even it's a federal agency who helps walk you through to understand. I think there's a lot of Silicon Valley organizations that don't have that, and that's why they're not as successful when they look to enter the federal market.
Yeah, I think we have not enough ego to think that we actually understand everything, right? Like, there's so much about the federal environment and how people work together, how software is consumed, what's the nature of the software, what are the kind of projects. Like, there's so much that we just don't know, and I think I'll be the first to say that. And so yeah, when we were going through the FedRAMP process, we obviously had one decision, which is, do we do everything from scratch without really knowing much of anything? Or do we work with an organization that's clearly done this before a few times? And it was lucky timing that Palantir was starting their FedStart program. And so we started working with them. We were one of their first partners on the FedStart program. I think they started the FedStart program around the same time we started building our tool. So kind of lined up there. And yeah, so for us, getting the full FedRAMP High authorization through Palantir's FedStart program took us roughly about 6 months, right? Which is relatively fast in the grand scheme of things. As I've talked to more people and I've said 6 months, they're like, sorry, repeat that again? It is definitely fast, but it helped accelerate that. And now we have a team that we can also bounce ideas off of. And it's just happened to be, we provide pretty complementary tools, right? They build a lot of things around the data side, we build a lot of things on the AI side that kind of work a bit hand in hand. So that was like part of it, just getting from a technology perspective, how do you enter this environment? How do you understand all the security controls? Which again, very important to get right. But then we actually have a really large kind of partner ecosystem, right? We work with the Kerasofts of the world and a number of other federal partners, so that we can get in contact and we can work with as many people as we can work with. If we were limited by just the manpower and the headcount that we have internally at the company, we wouldn't make the kind of progress that we want to make and we can make. And so we strongly believe in the partnership ecosystem, both in the federal environment and otherwise, frankly. And that's been a big, I think, reason why we've been able to have success with some of the large defense contractors, some of the kind of ancillary functions. And now we're having pretty deep conversations with a number of the agencies and departments of defense.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And in a moment ago, you mentioned sort of the scale and the impact you can have by working with the federal government. You really can't find in a lot of other places outside of maybe the financial institutions and other Even that, yeah. It's hard to replicate the scale of the federal government. A lot of people call it Fortune 1 for a reason. So, when you think about the role that public-private partnerships can play, especially as AI is really exploding right now, and there's this concerns about trustworthiness of it. There's concerns about keeping up with our adversaries and things like that. Why is that public-private partnership so important, not only for the scalable element, but also the element of trustworthiness and making sure that we as a nation are a leader in this space?
100%. I think I mean, it is critical, right? I think especially for a technology like AI, which if anyone reads the news, you will see every day you'll see some kind of like doomsday kind of headline of how AI is going to like end society as we know it, right? And if that is the prevailing public opinion, the only way to really combat that is through education and partnerships, right? And I think this is something that we're not alone in doing from the private sector, but I think we're playing a part, is really having conversations and peeling back the layers of this technology is moving really quickly. Let's actually understand what it is.
Yeah.
Let's understand its limitations, because it is not perfect. I think anyone who has worked with any AI tool has gotten at least one silly response back, if not more, right? It's clearly has its limitations, but really understanding like how are we building a system in a way that we're not letting AI or anything kind of like run, amok or whatever, public
Sure.
opinion might be. For example, we build all of our systems to be like human in the loop. Yes, we will suggest code changes and we'll suggest plans and things of that sort, but the developer is still fully in the driver's seat. They have to accept every change, do all those things, review the code. Like, it requires a certain amount of like, deliberate action to build tools in a way that can be trusted. But it is totally possible, and it is there to kind of balance that line between, tools that can do a lot of stuff, but then tools that people can trust, and you have to match that trust. And I think it's also a little bit self-serving, right? Like, it is really easy for me to create a demo that I can post, online and be like, look at AI writing, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Like, I can do that tonight if I wanted to. That'll work 1 out of 100 times.
Yeah.
So even from our perspective, that's not something that's worth us putting into the market. It isn't worth us trying to work with the government, because people will see that. We'll see right through that. They'll try the tool, they'll get 1 out of 100 times it'll work, and they'll be like, you know what, I'm cool not working with this tool. So it's actually also in our best interest to build tools that people can trust, and there's only so much talking that you can do.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it has to be built into the way that you think about your product.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that, because another element we hear quite a lot about is sort of the cultural transformation that comes, the people part of this, as people within federal agencies look to adopt and use this. There's a lot of excitement, sometimes there's resistance, there's questions about the future of work in general.
Yep.
So, especially in the current federal environment where things are a little chaotic, I'm curious, how do you go about that? How do you work with agencies to make sure that the end practitioners, those developers, are excited about using your product, and that they're in the loop and benefiting from it in a way that it's a human machine sort of team?
Yep. That is a great question. I don't know if I have like the perfect magic bullet for that, but then there's a number of things that we can and we do, right? On one hand, it's the pure partnership perspective, right? Once you start talking to developers and you ask them, what work are you doing that you don't really want to be doing?
Yeah.
They will have a list.
Yeah.
Every single person will have a list. No one's only working on stuff that they love to do. And they say, okay, what if AI can help you accelerate that?
Yeah.
And then, okay, that starts shifting the mentality. Right? I think there's obviously, again, it's the headlines. AI is going to take all the jobs. Same thing with software developers. There's fears around that. But then I think, if you take a step back and you think about really what software development actually is, it's 3 simple things. It's knowing what to build, it's figuring out how to build it, and then doing the building. And when you kind of frame it that way, you realize that AI will probably help a lot with doing the building, maybe even help a bit with how to build. But like figuring out what to build and understanding the constraints of systems and how the technology works under hood, that's never really changing. And those are the kinds of things that we teach in CS educations and universities. Like, it's the problem-solving aspect of things. And I think that core nature of software development, and call it anything, that's not changing. That's like not going anywhere. The nature of how we actually complete that work will change, and this is where the partnerships and education and teaching people who have never worked with a pair programmer 24/7 how to do that is all important. But I don't think jobs are like going anywhere. Like, AI is not the first tool that has made software development specifically easier.
Yeah.
A few decades ago, not too long ago, was punch cards.
Yeah.
No one does punch cards anymore, and we only have more developers.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the nature is going to change as new languages, new ideas. This is how it's always been, and AI is just going to be the next step. right? And I think what we'll realize is that working with a computer system in English as the language rather than a programming language will just be another part of the toolkit. So maybe I'm a techno-optimist, maybe that's the take, but if you just look historically on how technology has affected specifically software development jobs, but jobs as a whole, I think when the task is value creation like software is, the opportunity cost of not investing more in building software actually increases, and therefore you invest more in building software.
Yeah.
It's maybe an unintuitive cycle, but that's the cycle that always happens.
Yeah. So we didn't go into your background too much, but you've worked across a number of high-growth startups. You've worked at some really leading technology companies like Facebook and Google. So you have a breadth of knowledge on how moving quickly, sort of as we talked about earlier, and sort of trying things, that sort of Silicon Valley mentality. I said fail fast. You kind of reworded it to let's do something different in the federal space. But I'm curious if there are unique challenges or opportunities in addition to that you can talk to, that you see when translating, that engineering background that you have from the Valley into a federal AI landscape.
That's a good question. I mean, you mentioned it, right? The federal government's probably Fortune 1. Even in the Valley, as companies get larger, development rates slow down. That is natural. That is normal. You need to have some processes. Not everyone can be running around
Sure.
and just changing things all over the place.
Scale is tough.
So scale is tough, and the federal government again is like the biggest scale. But at the same time, one of the things that I've learned a lot about the federal government, not just over the last year, but longer, is while there is a large scale, things actually are a bit compartmentalized, whether it's like specific projects that are classified or different agencies or different parts of the defense. So even though the overall workforce is really large, I actually think there's an opportunity for like us, like in the federal government, to kind of rethink like, okay, we're actually, this project itself, if we just think about this project, it can actually move quite quickly if we want it to.
Yeah.
And so I think there's opportunities there, which is like slightly different, I think, from some like the really large tech companies where you have like legitimately like tens of thousands of developers working on like the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's opportunity there. But I think like in any scenario where you're spending a lot of time on menial work, where it isn't really activating people's creative juices, there's a lot of opportunity for the technology today to make a difference. And I think that's really where we're going to see it. And I think we'll see a lot of that actually in the federal government, in the older enterprises, rather than the Silicon Valley companies that are just by definition a little bit newer and have less of that.
Are there more of you out there? I'm curious. Like I'm a total East Coaster. I don't head over to your neck of the woods. So I imagine that Silicon Valley, as you traditional think about it, and especially in like the age of social media and things like that, doesn't seem like it's super interested in government. But has that changed at all, or are you sort of a unicorn in that sense?
I like to think we're a little weird.
Yeah.
I think so.
But there's there's like we were talking about earlier. There's Palantirs, Andurils.
Exactly.
I mean, there's any number of companies around that.
There's a lot happening in like gov tech, defense tech, all of that, and that's really exciting. I think we might be a little bit more on the unique side of companies that are like, honestly primarily focused on commercial, but also want to be doing federal.
Yeah.
I think we're probably a little bit more unique on the startup side there, but it also like fits a little bit more naturally on who we are. A lot of Silicon Valley is tooling, and especially for developers and other technologists, usually start by building for each other, right? Building for other small startups and going from there. We were a little bit unique that we started with the large enterprise and worked down. Our background actually is nothing like AI tools related. We were actually building GPU infrastructure. So we're an infrastructure company at heart. So like we're a little bit unique just given that background. But I would be very surprised if we're going to be the only one. We might be one of the first. But I think as the appetite for adopting such tools and moving quicker and all of these things start becoming more pervasive, because I think whether we want to or not, I think that's just going to be the natural nature of things as I guess the AI arms race of sorts kind of heats up. There's going to be more. There's going to be more people, and that private-public collaboration that you alluded to, I think, is only going to get stronger.
Do you think, and not to get too political, I mean, this is, we're talking about tech, but there's stuff going on in this city that there's changes, barriers are being broken down, things are looking different than they did this time last year. You know, the sort of focus of an administration like the current one to really want to break down barriers, is that more exciting and attractive to folks in the Valley? And is there anything, you know, that you think folks on the left coast, on the West Coast would like to see that you think would open more up to doing more work with the federal government?
That's interesting. I don't want to speak for like all the West Coast.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from my perspective, it's just like, I think I've met everyone I've met in this city or otherwise, right? It's like really just want the same thing, right? They want to see, you know, our defense industry. They want to see the federal government like do the best work possible, not waste money. Like these are things that like are uniform things that like everyone I've met cares about. It doesn't matter where in the political spectrum. So from that perspective, like that's kind of what we also care about, right? We care about how do we accelerate mission critical work? How do we do that for cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Like how do we save resources? Like those same core ideas are exactly the ideas that we tap in. And so I don't really know if it's very much like a political thing. Of course, yeah, there's always going to be change. But as long as everyone's on the same page about that, I think we'll be able to help whoever we can help.
Okay. So looking ahead 5 to 10 years, you know, as we close out, what do you believe will define success for AI in the federal space? And sort of, are there capabilities or shifts that you think we need to prioritize today to get there? Considering all things considered, you know, where the federal government is vis-a-vis, you know, commercial space in terms of in terms of AI adoption.
That's a good question. I think if I was to just say one thing, because there's probably less, but the one thing would be, I think if there's one change I could have, would be kind of rethinking adoption of technology as we've adopted something to we need to continuously adopt whatever the best there is.
Yeah.
And you know, I believe today, for example, our tool is like one of the best that you can get. It might not be us in 5 years. I hope it's us.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee in that, right? That's on us to keep on building the best technology. But if the government's always constantly viewing, like, okay, we have something, but is there something better out there that still matches all the security posture and all the things that we should be looking into? If that just constant iteration and pulling of that happens, I think we're going to be in a really good space, right? If nothing else changes, just if that underlying engine continues, good things will happen. So I'm not going to say like this is the technology we need to invest in, or this is the AI that will kind of put us in a good spot in 5 to 10 years. It's a little bit of a culture thing, and if that one change in the culture comes, I think we'll see a lot of really, really good stuff happen.
One last rapid fire question, and I'm sorry I focused so much on DC and Silicon Valley and bridging that gap, but I think it's important and very interesting. So for each, biggest misconception for, you know, now that you're kind of getting into the federal government about, you know, DC and the federal space, and then having been in the Valley, you know, for your entire career, biggest misconception for folks looking from the outside in.
It's a good one. Okay, you're putting me on the spot. I think the thing about DC is like I think the interpretation that people have from DC and Silicon Valley is that it's just a bunch of people that aren't really doing a whole lot and don't really like care less. Just like, okay, let's just got a bureaucracy, big bureaucracy. That's all it is. But no, when I talk to people here, it's like you can kind of feel the energy here. It's like people want to do stuff. Like people are trying to like push change and push things forward, and there's an energy there, right? It's just a very large organization, but there is an energy to do things. So I think that's probably a misconception that way, and I think we'll see rapid changes in tech even in the federal space.
Yep.
And I think on the other way around, I think probably people in DC are like, oh, Silicon Valley doesn't really care about like security or the things that would matter to like like national interests, and they're just like out here just like building tech without thinking of the constraints. I think that's also probably a misconception. I think most people from a pretty self-serving perspective in the Valley is just like, we need to be secure, otherwise we will go under. So I think like, there are companies like ours, and obviously you see the headlines of the people that don't do it well, but I think the vast majority of people in the Valley care about those things and want to do those things right as well. So I actually think there's probably more in common than both sides think.
Sure.
But yeah, I think this entire world is really cool. What was possible with this technology 6 months ago versus now is just dramatically different.
Yeah.
And I think that we just all have to get used to that kind of rate.
Well, it's amazing to watch. Everybody give Anshul a round of applause. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic chatting with you. Thanks.